Okay, welcome everybody. I think we've still got people filtering in, but it's okay, we'll get started. Welcome everybody to this month's contributors session of our community sessions that we are now hosting. On today's agenda, I'm just going to quickly share the correct screen. So for today, we have a few things that have been added to the issue. We've got a couple of questions around the Kubernetes plugin. So we have some of the team behind the Kubernetes plugin with us today, who hopefully can talk to a little bit around what's going on in that space, what to expect next, and how you all can contribute if you want to be part of that side of things. Also a question around contributing and working within the community, with the core team, with the maintainers and everybody else. We've also got a question around the Tech Insights plugin. I did see Martina's come in from Rody, who's been working on that. I'm not sure if Yusei's here as well, but we'll jump into that question as well. If anyone wants to add any more topics or things, please feel free to drop them into the issue on GitHub. Or if you want, you can also drop them into chat in Zoom, and we'll pick that up and add that to the issue to make sure we've got a record of it for later on. Again, this session today is all about kind of contributing and working within Backstage. So we're really looking for those conversations, those good insights, all of those types of things as we go through the session. To kick things off, I'm immediately going to actually throw it to the maintainers. I know I feel really bad. For the last contributor session, I may have forgotten to suggest the maintainer, any updates from the maintainers. So this time I'm not going to. Over to you guys. Is there any updates from the maintainer side of things to share today?
So now we're instead scrambling to have anything to say. Yes, we can say that we're working on a lot of deprecations across the more core parts of the project right now, particularly in the front-end plugins, like core app API, plugin API, errors, configuration, and so on. We're working on stabilizing things, and now is a particularly good time to be on top of updates and look at changelogs, just to make sure that the migration is smooth. I think that's all we have for updates. It takes a lot of work, so we're mostly doing that right now.
Cool, well, thank you, Patrick. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to jump across, and then we'll get into the questions that are coming up, is I wanted to take a look at our contributor spotlight. So hopefully this will go full screen and you can see it. So each month, as you know, we wanted to start sharing more about individual contributors and everybody in this community. So I think we started last month with our first contributor spotlight, and we're continuing this month. And this month we wanted to introduce, if you've not met, Colton. So hopefully, Colton, are you here today?
Yeah, I am.
Fantastic, fantastic. So what I wanted to do was just to introduce you just a little bit. So if you could tell us just a little bit about yourself and what brought you to Backstage, and then maybe we might get some more questions that come up.
Sure, sounds good. So I first heard of Backstage actually last month during Hacktoberfest. I'm actually a software engineer at Georgetown University doing some data pipeline engineering. I was a consultant in a previous life doing identity and access management, but I've always had a place in my heart for open source software. And for this Hacktoberfest, I was really looking around to find some kind of repository that I'd want to contribute to that would both be like a technology that I haven't worked with, but also something really cool that's being built. And I know Spotify has been doing a lot of really cool things. I'm familiar with like their Luigi project for building pipelines, and like Sio for working on Apache Beam. But then I landed on Backstage, and I've really enjoyed working with it. And to be honest, I was really intimidated at first to contribute, but after my first pull request and seeing how welcoming all the maintainers were and how much I learned just from their feedback, I've really enjoyed it, and I've been making more pull requests since then.
That's awesome. And you've been if I remember rightly, you've been mostly kind of in the, you've done a bit in TechDocs and Create App, right? Has that been mostly the focus?
That's right, yeah. So I've mostly been working on CLI stuff, both the Create App, I refactored that, added some unit tests and an additional argument. And then with TechDocs, I've been working on the publisher, supporting publishing to Google Cloud Storage, AWS, with like an optional root path so that you don't have to just have all of your documentation in the root of a repository. And then I also worked on a bug in TechDocs where the sidebar wasn't scrolling appropriately.
Nice, nice. How have you found that jumping into those areas? Well, I suppose jumping into the new project and specifically into those areas, has there been any challenges or any tips that you can share for people getting started?
Yeah. So this is also my first time working in a mono repo. I've always just worked in a ton of little repositories, and that's helped a tremendous amount. So whenever I'm lost, I just grep all of the code in the repo, and somebody else has already done something similar most of the time. I've also just been referencing like the contributing markdown, all of the readmes and the documentation. And to be honest, when I first started working on the project, I didn't fully understand what Backstage was in its entirety. It does a lot of things. So I've just been going through the Backstage documentation on the website to better understand the bigger picture of where Backstage fits into like this ecosystem of tooling.
Awesome. And I guess last question, then I promise to leave you alone. But last question, is there anything that you're interested in seeing coming into Backstage that isn't there right now? Or have you got anything that you'd like to see in Backstage that you can let the maintainers and everybody else in the community know?
I don't know if I have any feature ideas just yet. I'm still grasping to understand all of the plugins and stuff. At my previous job when I was consulting, we actually were software implementers for some identity and access management tooling. And I actually see a lot of parallels between what we were doing there and the adopters of Backstage itself. So just continuing to have a great like extensibility in the solution for clients is something that I really like. So just continuing to improve like the APIs and the documentation around building plugins and getting the software to fit into the needs of a given client. Because previously the software I implemented was all in Java, and you had like Bean Shell as like the scripting version of Java. So when you'd implement like client logic, it would be this crazy XML Java Bean Shell mess. So I can see Backstage already has like a better architecture laid out to support this extensibility. Yeah, that's it.
Cool. Well, I'll leave you in peace, mate. Thank you so much for jumping in and all of the work that you have been putting in. I hope you continue, and it's great to see all of the stuff there. And if you do need anything, I know you said at first maybe it's such a big project and all the community and kind of contributing in that space. It's a great community. So if stuff comes up and you need support or have questions, reach out on Discord, reach out to this community. It's fantastic. So again,
it's been really great, and I've learned a lot. Yeah, thank you so much.
Great stuff. Okay, so next up, I think we should go to the GitHub issue. However, where has Chrome disappeared to? There we go. Let's jump across to the GitHub issue and the questions that had come up in there. So the first one up is an update on the Kubernetes plugin and related work around this issue that is planned. So if I pop that issue open, the future of the future of Kubernetes plugin contributions. So Matt is actually on the call with us today, and I believe some of Warp Speed, the team that is that owns this plugin. Matt, I'm wondering if you could kick us off, maybe give an introduction, introduce some of the people that have been working on it, and tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
Yeah, great. I'm not actually sure who's joined. I think Sonia's here. I'm not sure she was expecting to say hello, but hi.
Yes, I wasn't.
Surprise.
Hi.
Yeah, so Sonia and I are on the team Warp Speed, which owns deployment infrastructure at Spotify. And we own the Kubernetes plugin for Backstage. Yeah, I can talk a bit about some of the work that's been ongoing here and some of the possible upcoming work that I've seen people in the community are interested in adding. Some things that just kind of come off the top of my head are I did some refactoring because there was a bunch of duplicated code in the back end. So it made it very confusing to add new Kubernetes objects to be returned. But now it's much simpler and it's just completely generic. So whatever you want to add in to get returned from your Kubernetes clusters, it's very easy now. So there's much less code that needs to be written for that to happen. Some other change that I've been working on in the background for a while, like since we first actually did the UI for the plugin, has been showing container CPU and memory usage in the plugin. Like in the pod table, you should be able to see, you know, the CPU memory usage and the breakdown per container. Unfortunately, the way the JavaScript Kubernetes client was done, it was actually quite difficult to do that through the Kubernetes metrics API. So I actually had to go and add the Kubernetes metrics API to the JavaScript Kubernetes client. So yeah, I think last time I checked, I was just waiting for that to get released in a version so that we could use it in Backstage. Because as basically the Kubernetes API is quite annoying. I promise I'm not tangenting, only a little. If you want to return a pod and the resources that it uses, it's two different API calls. So you can list a bunch of pods and then you can list their metrics. And then you have to kind of match them up to see which pod is consuming what. And it was turning out that the logic I was going to add to Backstage was like complicated and it was actually really generic. So it should have just lived in the Kubernetes JavaScript client. So I added it there, and then the logic in Backstage can be much simpler. But yeah, whenever that library gets released, I haven't looked recently to see when it has been, then it should be pretty easy to just add in resource consumption. And we already have horizontal pod autoscaler resource consumption because that's much easier to get. So that would be really good because then not only would you be able to see the state of like the pods that are running, but you would also be able to see their consumption. And then, you know, we could even put in some UI elements to indicate that, you know, there is a lot of consumption of resources or, you know, there's a lot of wastage of resources. So there's lots of possibilities that can be built on top of there, which kind of leads me into the next thing that people have been talking about in the community, which is expanding the UI beyond just what is there at the minute. One request that I saw that was linked in the GitHub issue, which was if people want to be able to put the log link for the specific pod beside the pod in the UI. And yeah, that makes a bunch of sense. We actually, in the closed source version that was the predecessor to this plugin, we do have the log link. It's just that adding that in a generic way will probably require us to consider more things. So it might be easy, for example, to do it in Google Cloud, because you could just link to cloud logging. But depending on where each user is actually set up to forward their logs to, it actually might require a bit more thought. But yeah, the customizability that is really interesting. I think it's necessary. And then some of the other things that I'm thinking about that we'll probably end up adding quite soon are the ability to add CRDs in. So that's already possible, but adding closed source CRDs would be very interesting because at the minute there's like kind of in tree and out of tree React components for different CRDs. So like open source ones, you can obviously just commit those to the Backstage repo. You know, that's fine. Anyone can use them. But a lot of companies and organizations have closed source CRDs and they don't want to open source the UI for them. So it should be possible to reference those CRDs and export a custom UI for them. And I think that will just be part of the kind of setup process. You might just import those whenever you're creating the Kubernetes plugin in your local setup. But yeah, and then there's some other interesting PRs that I've seen, which are expanding the different types of objects that get returned. So you should also be able to see like cron jobs and daemon sets. They might have like slightly different UIs because cron jobs you might want to see, you know, when was the last time it ran? You might want to see when it next runs again, that sort of thing. But yeah, we are kind of getting close to getting all of the like vanilla Kubernetes objects covered. And then I think a lot of the focus will probably be on CRTs and customization.
Awesome. Thanks, man. And James, I can see it was originally your question on the GitHub issue. Did that answer everything that you were looking for, or are there any other questions you want to ask while we're here?
I guess the only question I would have is, would contributions upstream be welcome for things like the customizing of the columns or adding cron jobs into the UI? Absolutely.
Like the whole thing is open. You know, you can absolutely contribute whatever you want. Nothing is like, no, this is our code. You know, this is my own little section here and you're not allowed to contribute. I think you could like absolutely like raise an issue for anything. We can discuss how to do it, or you can just raise a PR like if it's, you know, fairly straightforward. Yeah, I think like for the customization, that would be really great if you could work on it, because like I say, that I think that will be very useful. Like everyone is going to want to tweak the UI to work for their specific case.
Gotcha. Great. Yeah, that answers everything, I think.
Okay, James, I noticed you had another part to your question on GitHub. You were asking about how best to contribute and work with the core team here. Invest in a bit of resources, and you called out an issue specifically. Is there anything on that side of stuff that you want to touch on?
I think it was mostly around like the Kubernetes plugin. We've been working on adding in like logs and custom columns, and we proof of concept cron jobs internally, and just wanted to see how we could best contribute that upstream. So I think for the most part it's been answered, but if there is any better way to like work with like Spotify internal teams who own these plugins that hasn't already been stated, that would be helpful.
I don't know if one of the maintainers, maybe as a side, Patrick or Ben or Freven or anybody, any tips from there that we haven't covered off on contributing or working with the core team, sorry, the internal Spotify teams?
I don't think there is anything specifically. I think it's good to, I mean, if there are bigger changes, like raise an issue early on, and so we can discuss it through, but otherwise, like, all contributions are very much welcome from us.
And a draft pull request is another method. If you have a little bit of code and you want to know, like, is this a good plan ahead way to continue? But, you know, before writing documentation and tests and so on, just to
Indeed.
kind of see what, yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, let's move on then. So, make sure I've got the right window again. Okay, the next question that we had down was from Mattis. I don't know, are you with us today? Perhaps not. Maybe worth a touch in anyway. So he was asking around an outlook on the Tech Insights plugin. Which parts are already planned, scope, out of scope, some suggested path for adopters, and best way to contribute and influence the work. I did see Martina came in earlier. I don't know if Jusse's here as well, but maybe Martina, you could speak to it if not. Oh, Jusse's here. Okay, fantastic. Could you guys talk a little bit to that? What's going on with the Tech Insights plugin, and where is it going?
Yeah, Martina actually left, I think, already, so I kicked her out and joined instead. So Tech Insights is now on the main or master on Backstage itself, the backend part of it. And there is the first item that actually does something with it, which I think was merged in today, which we call fact retrievers, and that handles only the entity data in there. And the next stage that there is a pull request open, I think Irma from our side, from Rodi side, introduced the scorecard item or UI item in there yesterday or something. So with few tweaks, we should be able to get that in soon enough as well. That means that when we started this Tech Insights path, we kind of had like two goals with it. One was to introduce these scorecard items, scorecards into Backstage. And the other part was to introduce this, I guess we can call that concept as Tech Insights in general, which would be then using this kind of data to have a little bit more logic within these Tech Insights. And when we get Irma's pull request in there, we would be having the minimal MVP of the scorecard kind, not a scorecard, scorecard path for this whole Tech Insights stuff. The next items that we are tackling on then is to start creating a fact retriever. We chose GitHub to be our next like integration point on this, to fetch facts from GitHub, specifically on the user side. So actually not thinking about technology, but thinking about people here and getting information from there, and then creating the UI components to actually display that. The specific thing that we are after on the Tech Insight side is the Spotify's metric that you guys advertise on your blog post, etc. around Backstage. So the time to 10th commit, we want to like create an MVP to be able to actually display that on the Backstage side of things as well, or in Backstage with these like Tech Insight stuff enabled for users. That being said, with those things, we kind of have MVP. So when we get that time to 10th commit out as well, we'll have both MVPs for scorecards as well as, I still want to call it Tech Insights. Maybe we need to find a better name for it, but the other part of Tech Insights as well. For adopters, the API on the backend side, when it comes to creating like fact retrievers and logic around that, there are a few tiny tweaks that I've seen that will likely come in, but it will most likely not be anything breaking. So the pull request from Irma introduced one extra field on the objects or shapes of the objects that needs to be created. But other than that, nothing seems to change, at least on the short term, unless we start rethinking everything. So I think that is, well, it's the first iteration of this, so take it with a grain of salt, but in a fairly stable state. And best way to contribute, influence the work is, so there are two things that we kind of are after here. The first thing that will benefit the wider community, regardless of what approach they want to take with Tech Insights, is to create fact retrievers. So creating these integration points towards external services. So currently there is an integration point towards actual Backstage entities themselves, but we kind of foresee that there will be integrations toward the technical aspects of GitHub, or let's say you want some stats from Jenkins or whatever. So those items, creating fact retrievers to get that data from those external services to Backstage would be very beneficial. The other part is currently all these checks. So if we think about scorecards specifically, all these checks are run against JSON rules engine. So we can do true false scorecards with that implementation. So if there is need, I know there were comments on the previous pull requests and pull requests for comments. We were having discussions that we kind of want to introduce different kind of results from these checks, other than true false values only, so ranges or whatnot. And that would mean that different kind of checkers would need to be introduced into the whole tech insights bit as well. Yeah, I think that's probably all the items of the question itself. So yeah, there are a few more items planned to be shipped to get MVP on both sides of the table. And yeah, there are a few different avenues if people want to contribute, want to influence what way to go forward. So I'd recommend to take a look at those. And of course, yeah, we can talk about API stability on this one, but since it is still early days on this, the more contributions we get in, the better outlook we can see if the API that we have envisioned will work or not. The more, the better when it comes to contributions in this case.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing, UC. So that actually brings us to the bottom of our GitHub issue with all of the topics raised for this session today. We're going to wrap up here then for today, a little bit shorter than our typical sessions, but that's totally okay. I think it's been a great conversation, a great few topics. If you do have any more topics or things you want to discuss, please, of course, reach out in Discord and we can have the conversation there, or up on GitHub and in discussions there. Again, just to highlight and say thank you for joining the community and thank you for jumping in head first, Colton. It's been super great to see. Thank you to everybody today for taking part, to Matt for discussing through Kubernetes there, for you say on the tech insight side of things. Please do fill out our Thank you, Tim. Please do fill out our feedback form if you have opportunity. We really do want to get better at these sessions. There's a link to the form. And that brings us to a close for today. So thank you all. Please take care and hope to see you soon out in the community.